Well, hello. Welcome back. Back indoors. I've changed me tune. I've swapped places, given up the chair. Hard service, bench seat. Sturdy, firm. Chapter 9 today. Chapters 9 and 10. Gonna do them. Yeah. Not going to piss about too much. We get straight into it. What's happened so far? Well, the last time we were here was Butch was taking Trudy off for a little drink. Before that, Petra had just turned up at the police station to see her daughter Daisy, who was recounting her tale of woe from the allotments to a weary Sergeant Frisk. So let's just get straight into it. That's what we're reading. We don't know by now. Chapter 9. Oh, hang on. I've had a great idea. What's the great idea? To drink that. Where are you, you little sod? Reverend Bowen said to herself, leaving the police station, crossing the high street to the butcher's opposite. Moses, as always, was by her side. Bowen was trying her best to hold herself together, but the heat was not helping. She slung her leather waistcoat over her shoulder and loosened her chafing dog collar around her neck, its constriction an appropriate metaphor for her current state of mind, really starting to irritate her. She longed to get out on her trike later, but her meeting with the bishop had to be dealt with first, and it was really beginning to play on her mind. The thought that she might soon find herself ousted from her beloved vicarage, her home for almost 20 years, and be forced into a smaller new build on the new housing development at the edge of the village troubled her deeply. In fact, it did more than that. It disgusted her. She could try and butter the bishop up with as much steak and red wine as she liked, but she felt in her heart that the outcome would be the same. They would sell the vicarage off to the highest bidder in order to swell the church coffers, and she would be forced into the smaller, soulless new build. She was fast losing grip on what little faith remained, and that wild-eyed smirk of Douglas Blouse emerging from the shed was still burning at the forefront of her mind. She saw Butch Ransom turning left off the high street onto the causeway. Unsurprisingly, he was with a female companion. A ripple of resentment ran through her as she thought of another thing she had sacrificed in the name of her religion. The sign in the door of E. Bumstead's Family Butchers, hanging slightly to one side, said open, much to Reverend Bowen's relief. Unfortunately, next to it was a hastily scribbled note, written in pencil, that read, "Back in 5 minutes." The tail of the T trailing off, leaving the word unfinished. It seems that whatever had temporarily called the butcher away must have clearly been a matter of some urgency. She tapped her foot with impatience, wondering how much of the 5 minutes had already elapsed. Moses looked up expectantly at her and began to whimper. "Don't blame me," she said, tying him loosely to the newsagent's swing sign next door. She went for another look in the window, cupping her hands around her face to restrict the glare of the sun, trying to see if there were signs of life inside. Nothing. In fact, quite the opposite, she thought, looking at the rows of dismembered animals on display. She leant against the door, immediately startled to feel it give way under her weight. She stumbled into the butcher's, nearly falling flat on her face in the process. "Knock and the door shall be opened, eh, Reverend?" Eric Bumstead said, smiling, wiping his hands with a blue paper towel as he emerged through the silver and green chain-link partition from the rear of the shop. Bowen composed herself, regaining her balance. "Eric, you left your door unlocked. I could have been anyone. You're not very safety conscious, are you?" she said, wrinkling her brow. "You should think about that, considering all the trouble we've been having. Count yourself lucky that little sod didn't put your window through." "I know, Reverend. I heard about all that. Perhaps young Douglas thought he'd spare his old boss the trouble. I see old Mr. Qureshi this morning. Not a happy bunny," he said, exhaling and shaking his head. "I know I should have locked the door and all, but it was a bit of a do-or-die situation, if you know what I mean. Got a bit of irritable bowel syndrome. I think it might have been some out-of-date pate I had for my tea last night. I won't go into details, Reverend. Wouldn't want to put you off your dinner, he said with a wry grin. Very considerate of you, Eric, she said. Well, I'm glad I caught you anyway. Time is getting on. I thought I was going to be forever at that police station. Police station? Bumstead inquired. You not given a statement already about your window? Everyone else has, he said. Sorry to hear about that, by the way, Reverend, he added as a sympathetic afterthought. I gave my statement about the window to Sergeant Frisk this morning, Eric, yes, foolishly thinking that that would be the end of it, but how wrong I was. Bowen went on to fill Bumstead in on the more recent events concerning herself, Daisy and Douglas. Eric Bumstead grinned, stroking the ginger stubble on his chin as he listened to Bowen's story. Yeah, he always was a bit of a strange one, was our Douglas, Bumstead said, pushing up the thick-rimmed glasses on his big flat nose. Decent worker when he wanted to be. And my girls seemed to like him when he worked here with them on Saturdays. Of course, he worked the odd weekday as well after he packed school in. Think they had a bit of a thing for him, if truth be told. Couldn't tell you why, mind, he said, scratching his bristly chin again in absent-minded contemplation. But they do say that girls like a bad boy, don't they, Reverend? Reverend Bowen knew the Bumstead twins, as she did nearly everyone in the village, in her role as parishioner. She had the pleasure of baptising the twins when they were still babies, remembering how they felt like a pair of cross-eyed bowling balls in her arms as she struggled with them at the font. Both girls had been born slightly cross-eyed, Mandy's right eye looking towards her rounded nose, Donna's her left. This was the only distinguishing feature that set them apart as identical twins. I wouldn't say I approved of them going down to that caravan of his, Eric said, a little warily, reaching into the meat counter to retrieve 2 fillet steaks. He always used to boast to them about having his own place. Never mind the fact that it was that tatty old thing. They'd work together some Saturdays when it was busy, he said, weighing the vicar's meat. I'd send him out on his bike to make deliveries round the village, and the girls would help me in here. Took his time some days, mind. Pushed his luck a bit, did our Douglas. That bloody railway, wasn't it? He said, shaking his head with a wry grin. Easily distracted, shall we say. Well, in the end he just stopped turning up and I had the girls to lend a hand if we were busy. I still sorted his mum out with a few sausages from time to time when they was a bit short of cash, which of course they mostly were after Bertie buggered off, Bumstead said. He apologised, realising his bad language. Nice lady though, Alice. She's had a lot to put up with. Poor her, Reverend Bowen thought unsympathetically, digging into her purse for a £10 note. Most people had problems in their lives. She was currently facing the biggest spiritual and domestic crisis of her life, but that didn't mean that it gave her licence to put people's windows through with rocks wrapped in dirty pictures of their backsides and holding young girls hostage in garden sheds. As if reading her thoughts, Bumstead said, You seen them pictures, I suppose, Reverend? Of his he paused. Of his backside? Done the old dot to dot on it yet? Bowen frowned. I'm sorry, Eric, I don't quite follow you, she said. Girls told me about it a few years ago now. I suppose it would have been when Douglas was still going to school, Bumstead said. On the bus. My girls got on the same one. Young Douglas thought he was a bit of a lad, didn't he? Well, a big fish in a small pond round here he might well be, but there was bigger fish elsewhere, especially on the bus with all them lads from the other schools. They used to tease him something rotten by all accounts, he said, wrapping the steaks in paper. They went to different schools, but they all still got on the same bus, didn't they? Recipe for disaster, if you ask me. Calling him Douglas, the big girl's Blouse. Easy target, really, with a name like that. My girls got it and all. On the bus and at school. The bum-stench twins, they used to call them. Kids can be right bastards sometimes, Reverend. Pardon my Dutch. Bowen nodded, the image of Douglas grinning as he emerged from the shed coming to mind. Indeed they can be, Eric, she said. They used to tease my girls because of their cross eyes as well, or their asthma. nicking their inhalers and lobbing them about the place. Sometimes it was because of their size. You know, my girls are a bit on the large side, shall we say, Reverend? Not their fault they eat well, is it? If it weren't that, then they'd have to have a go about me and their mum just because we had 'em a bit later on in life. How's your nan and grandad? They'd ask 'em. The girls were worse than the boys for the teasing. Little cows, he said. My girls might not have been blessed in them departments, Reverend, but they're more loved than any of them little trollops on that bus or in that school, I can tell you that, Bumstead said proudly. Bowen gave him a wan smile, wary of the time but strangely fixated by the butcher's story. And what's all this got to do with Douglas, Eric? Well, one day a bunch of lads all got Douglas on the back of the bus, laid him face down across their lap on the back seat. That's where all the so-called bad boys like to sit, isn't it? He said. Bowen didn't, but took his word for it. Anyway, he had his darts on him, didn't he, silly sod? You know he used to call me Mr. Bristow, on account of my first name, see? Hero to our Douglas was Brizzy, the governor. Anyway, they got him across the back seat, held him face down, arms and legs, stretched out like bloody Superman. Then they pulled down his trousers and pants and stuck them darts right in his ass cheek, didn't they, the savage little bastards? Shouted the whole bus down, Douglas did by all accounts. My girls were sat near the front. Less trouble there, away from all that kind of thing, you know. But they sees what them lads are doing to him. Left him with the scars to prove it and all. Well, 3 little dots. I noticed them when old Mr. Qureshi showed me that photocopy this morning. Bit hard to spot amongst all the spots, he said, but you can still make 'em out. Reverend Bowen found herself completely absorbed by Bumstead's story, and now, knowing all that, she finally had some concrete evidence to link Blouse to the windows. She quickly paid the butcher, thanking him before dashing towards the door. Hey, Reverend, Bumstead called out as she pulled the door. Perhaps that's why Douglas has got a bit of an axe to grind with you. I don't quite follow, Eric, she said. Well, your surname, Bowen, like Jim Bowen off Bullseye. If it hadn't been for old Bertie going on there, he wouldn't have met that Welsh tart and left the way he did, if you get my meaning, Reverend. A distinct possibility, I suppose, Eric, Bowen said, her hand on the door handle. Now, if you'll excuse me, I really must be going. Good luck, Reverend. Hope you enjoy them steaks. See you Saturday at the Fete. God bless. The Fete, indeed. She couldn't risk having that lunatic boy running around unhinged with the Fete only 2 days away. At least now, after Eric's potted biography of Douglas, she finally had some real evidence. All they needed to do now was find him and prove it. Reverend Bowen dashed out the door, steaks dangling beside her in the blue and white striped carrier bag. She looked both ways on the high street before crossing. Then she remembered. Moses! She'd left him tied up to the swing sign outside the newsagent. Hastily, she turned around, cursing herself for being so forgetful. And then her heart sank, because Moses was no longer there. Chapter 10. Butch, Trudy and Finn walked the cobbled causeway beneath the shade of the horse chestnuts towards the Crafty Digit. Something in Butch told him they should be holding hands. Something else told Butch that if he tried, she would not resist. In the short time he had known her, he had become quite smitten with Stevenson's newest resident, although he was moderately disappointed to find out her marital status. He didn't let it dampen his spirits, or let it spoil the enjoyment he felt in her company. He thought once more about reaching out to hold her hand, but to be on the safe side he kept it in his pocket. Butch liked what Trudy had to say. He admired the fact she was clearly a strong-minded, independent woman with her own ambitions. He also liked the aromatherapy part, thinking he might get himself booked in for a massage sometime, although unfortunately he doubted it would include the happy ending he hoped for. Halfway down the causeway was the small village shop that, along with Mr. Qureshi's newsagent, served as the general store to Stevenson's residence. Like Fabsolutely Babulous, it was bigger than it looked from the outside, and you rarely left without whatever you had come in for. Butch told Trudy to wait outside, before skipping up to the shop like an excited child. 2 minutes later, he reappeared, holding his hands behind his back and grinning a broad, dopey grin. "Lift all right," he said, standing in front of her. "I'm sorry," she replied, a little confused. "Don't be. Come on. Time is somewhat of the essence here, Trudy Fruity. This could be the most important decision you make all day. Now, lift all right." Trudy wore a quizzical grin, her eyes glinting in the sun. "Lift," she said, mimicking Butch's accent. "Oh, Trudy," Butch said, amused at her bravado. "Taking the piss, are we?" he said in good humour, before drawing his arm around from behind his back. "Good choice, that lady," Butch said, holding out an orange Calippo. Trudy let out a surprised laugh. "Welcome to Stevie," he said, grinning. "But don't look too happy just yet, Trudy," he said. "Look at what you could have won," as Douglas's favourite game show host would say. From behind his back, he revealed an identical Calippo. Trudy laughed as Butch ripped the foil from it, proudly holding it aloft. "Cheers," he said to Trudy, smiling. In tender cooperation, Trudy held her Calippo aloft, tapping it against Butch's before walking the last 100 or so yards to the pub. Join me soon for chapters 11 and 12. Yeah.
See you later.